Hey, everybody, welcome back to Great Mondays Radio. Hema Crockett, who is a recovering HR executive, is with us today. She has quite a journey that she has been through and I guess I would say, put her money where her observations were, in that she actually left her career as an executive because she saw some interesting trends and wanted to take advantage of it. And I asked her to come on Great Mondays Radio because I think it's a really interesting way to put a finer point on a trend that we're starting to see. So I'll leave it there, cliffhanger. Hema Crockett, thank you for coming on Great Mondays Radio.
Hey Josh, thanks for having me. Excited for our conversation today.
So Hema, you spent 18 years as an HR executive, fintech, what you hyper growth, some of those other like key high stress HR jobs, but you decided it was time to leave it all behind because of what you described to me, and I would wondered if you could just start there. What was it that you saw that made you go, actually things are changing?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it was probably a couple of things. One in hindsight, and then one while I was living it. So the in hindsight was I was fortunate enough to live in Nepal for a couple of years and trek Everest Base Camp. And what I realized is our relationship to work is very different in the US than it is in other countries. And I wasn't working 70, 80 hours a week when I lived internationally, but I certainly was before I left. So I told myself when I came back that I was not going to go back to that. And the first 6 months, I stayed true. And after that, I slowly started going back into the 60, 70, 80-hour work weeks. And
Creeps up on you.
it creeps up on you. And when you're in HR, as we all know, it doesn't stop. There's always something new to do, something
Yeah,
that you didn't think was going to happen
right,
happens.
right.
And at my final startup, before I had decided to kind of change course in my life, my co-founder and we had built that startup from about 150 to 700 in 18 months. So we were flying the plane while building the entire HR infrastructure simultaneously. And as we went from a unregulated to a regulated industry, we ended up laying off more than half of that population in about 3 months. And what I started to realize is this constant up and down that we do in our organizations, these constant changes that we're making, sometimes can be honestly hair trigger decisions
Mm,
based on what's happening externally as well,
mm.
really affect our culture. And they really affect us on just a personal and human level. And for me, that was really this turning point of I no longer wanted to give everything I had to one organization, especially if I was giving 60, 70, 80 hours a week. I wanted to do it not only for multiple organizations, but really places that wanted to make a change, places that wanted to put culture first, that wanted to put the human first in everything they were doing. And that for me was why I made that change from being in-house HR to coming out and originally starting as an independent consultant before starting Gig Talent.
So I'm gonna stop there because there was a point that or a trend that you saw, which was that, or you articulated here, that there's so many changes that are occurring. So in your case, you went from unregulated to regulated, and that was part of your growth pattern. And it forced I would say, a seismic shift. If you had to lay off, 400 people, that's like, that is so painful for everyone involved.
Exactly.
And I think I want to expand that moment, or that identification of that pattern, because when we're thinking about high growth tech startups, there is so much that's going to happen. Some things you have control over and choices that you make, markets you want to enter, products you want to launch, and some you have no control over. And the rate, and I think this is the key point, the rate at which those occur make it so that it's hard to see them coming. And the businesses are in fact just in turmoil often because of something that is happening this quarter that you didn't expect to happen. And we're watching, there's like the market cycles are a little bit quicker now. You've got downturns and upturns, and I can't tell what's going on about, like, hey, these companies are laying off, 1,000 people. These companies are hiring 1,000 people. And it's like, it's not that that's bad. I mean, it's the market working, but it's happening too quickly for,
Yeah.
I think, humans or organizations of humans to adapt to. Is that a fair sort of expansion of what you observed?
Absolutely. What I would combine it with is even those changes that we did expect or that we kind of knew were coming eventually, we were unprepared for to some degree,
Mm.
right? And this really goes back to what is leadership like within our organizations and what are we focusing on? And are we giving everybody the necessary information? And I don't mean all levels of the organization. I mean, even just at a leadership team level, are we disseminating information so that people can make the best decisions? I can think of times in my career where all the information wasn't disseminated, and within the people function, we continued to hire
Yeah.
not knowing that there was going to be changes on the horizon. Now, would we have done things differently? Absolutely. Would we advise our business leaders differently? Absolutely. We just didn't have access to all of the information. So I think it's an and conversation. There's definitely things that crop up that we can't predict,
Yeah.
but I also think it's how do we handle and how do we organize around the things that we can control or that we do know are coming.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So that's a great ad, right? Where you're like, oh, here it comes, but then also it's like it's still too much to
It's a lot.
it's a lot, and it's a lot for us as humans, as individuals, to absorb. So, and then I think that was sort of the moral of the first part of your story. Now, the second half is you started a company, which is the company you run now, Gig Talent. What tell me fairly quickly about how you came to this business model, what we can learn from that.
Yeah, so I'm based in California, which is where our company is located. And I say that because a few years ago, the government passed an AB5 ruling, which basically is commonly known as more of an Uber or Lyft law, who's W-2, who's 1099. And that really changed the face of consulting within the state of California. It really made it more difficult for folks to want to be independent, to join the gig economy, and to kind of work on their own terms.
Mm.
And so what myself and my business partner came up with was this model, and we had our team actually that we have today. Everybody was part of this. It was coming up with a business model that alleviates the pressure that is put on both individuals who want to work differently and organizations who don't want to have a fixed head count, but still need work completed. So we focus only in the HR consultant and leadership coaching space. We vet all of our consultants from really a risk mitigation perspective for not only them as individuals, but for our clients as well. And then we help them get work that is in their wheelhouse, that they're passionate about, that they love doing. So it's really a win-win for our HR consultants and coaches, but also for the organizations who can use their skill set, folks who
Hmm.
are able to hit the ground running, who are vetted, known entities. I know in my previous lives, it was usually a friend of a friend that I called when I
That's right.
needed a consultant. I wasn't
Yep.
sure their work
Yep.
ethic. I wasn't
Have
sure
you
of a
worked
lot of
with this
things.
person before? Like, can you
Right.
tell me? Yeah.
Totally. Are they good? Are they not? I don't really know what to expect, but what choice did we have?
Yeah.
So we solved for that because we have such a deep HR background. We took the learnings on what worked and what didn't when we were in-house and built a model for really not only with the way that people want to work, but the way that organizations want to engage with talent, which is very different than it used to be.
Well, so this is to me the crux of like what is so interesting and why I wanted to talk to you, which is that we're now you're sort of self-discovery and your road to this business is illuminating, I think, a trend that has been, I don't know, sketched or hypothesized for a while, which is this kind of, I don't know, what was the book, Freelance Nation or something like that.
There has been quite a few, yeah.
Right. So, and it's, and it's sort of gone through the hype cycle. But what is interesting to me is that like you said, we're in sort of this moment of it's a win-win, which makes it like that's jackpot. That's what's going to work is we have coming off the tail of, what everybody was talking about, quiet quitting. Well, what's the driver of that? It's like, well, my company's not taking care of me, and it's not like I don't get of the benefit that comes along with the difficulties, and maybe there's even more of working for a full-time organization. And so you have these folks who want to do great work and are looking for ways to do that, but not have to do the 80 hours in order to, prove or suffer through that. And the organizations themselves are also, like we just said, buffeted by these, you know, extreme winds. It's almost like business climate change. It's almost what it
It
is.
really is, yeah.
Right. And you have these kind of going back and forth, and you're like, I don't know. And I got this and I need that. And then just anecdotally, how many people I see on LinkedIn raising their hands saying, hey, fractional, CHRO
Yeah,
or fractional this, right? This term of fractional, I think is,
yeah,
it's like an interesting thing. And to me, that's where we're starting to see a real change in the way that businesses are organized.
absolutely.
So you before we started recording, you said that there has been a lot of other organizations, a lot of other companies that will sort of loan out contractors or hire free agents. But there weren't really so much in HR.
Mhm.
Did I get that correct?
Yeah, not only so much in HR, but also from a vetted perspective. There are companies out there in a similar space to ours, absolutely.
Yeah.
Uh, but I go with this idea of you're not sure who you're going to get. And so we take that extra step because it's really important. Our clients are giving access, right, to personal information, to
Yeah.
company strategy, to these fractional folks that are coming in. They better be vetted. You better know who you're getting
Yeah.
so that you feel comfortable with it.
Well, so you're doing the work that used to be on the company.
Exactly.
And then on the other side, what I thought was really interesting is that you're providing a community for these freelancers, right? So we have this
Yeah.
epidemic of loneliness. And so there's a lot of noise from, people talking about, and I think rightly so, where it's like, well, if you don't come into the office, you're going to be lonely, you're going to be this and that and the other thing. And we can talk about how, what types of connections require this, or folks want. But I like that, that is part of your value proposition, because that's something, again, that you're sort of transferring the onus of that soft benefit from the company to yours, and you're creating this community, which I think is really compelling. It's a great use case of like a interest group, like a common interest group, something that you want to join, because there's so many of those communities out there.
Absolutely. And it really boils down to this. I think, you know, people want to work. They just want to work differently. And in order to work differently, there's so many barriers to entry, right? Whether that's the loneliness from the community aspect, whether that is the sales and marketing side, they're just not good at it. But they're phenomenal at the work and they're passionate about it and experienced in it. What we try to do is limit those barriers to entry. So we create a community. We want our consultants and coaches to get to know one another, but it's also why we are actually a bit limiting in terms of who we allow into the gig talent collective as well. We want
Right.
folks who are committed to this type of work because that's going to have results on the other end when they're placed with a client. But it's absolutely minimizing these barriers to entry for so many who want to work differently, who don't want to be lonely, who are scared of whatever it may be in order to make that jump. How can we soften that blow? How can we help them and be a support and be a partner for them so that they can bring, again, we hear this concept of bring your best self to work. This
Yeah.
is their work. This is their job. So we're
Yeah.
creating that environment in a way that allows them to retain their independence as an independent contractor.
Yeah. So cool. So I want to push our story forward here.
Absolutely.
You said that you had you had two observations, one going into it and one while you're in it. Can you talk to me about that second observation that you made in after starting Gig Talent?
Yeah. So there's definitely trends, right? We see this all the time, especially in HR. I mean, you had one right now, quiet quitting. Everybody talked about it as being a trend. There were so many things that were happening. And what's interesting to me, and this I really noticed when we started Gig Talent, but it happens today as well, is the types of consultants and the types of conversations and the type of work that we're seeing is very cyclical in nature in terms of, do people need compensation work? Do they need leadership work? Do they need coaches? And early on, the observation that really came up for me was around leadership. And leadership was something I was thinking about before I left that last in-house position as well, right? What would leadership have done differently had they known a lot
Mhm.
of these things were coming?
Mhm.
Are there folks that and being in HR, we see this all the time. Who are the folks that we're promoting that shouldn't be promoted into leadership roles? Right? Who are the ones that don't even want to be in leadership roles, but are kind of forced to be in these leadership roles? And do they even have the foundation to become a leader?
Mhm.
And it was early on in the pandemic that we started noticing, I really started picking up on these trends. We were getting a lot of calls for, I need a facilitator to help me, teach managers how to lead in a remote environment. I need a coach to help this leader or that leader. We need facilitation on how to have courageous conversations. All of these things, which we kind of can take for granted in terms of, shouldn't leaders know how to do these things?
Mhm.
And my husband retired from the Marine Corps after 23 years, and he and I were comparing notes during this time around what leadership is like in the military and what leadership is like in corporate America. And one idea that really came up for us was that in the military, folks are taught how to be leaders from day one. These are the leadership principles of the Marine Corps. This is how they translate to who we are as an organization and how we work. And I have never, ever in my career worked at a place where from day one, you're a kind of told, this is what it means to lead at our company. This is what it means to show up as a leader. Doesn't matter your level or title or role within the company. Doesn't matter if you are managing people. Just what does it mean to lead, period? And that really led to this idea of a book that he and I wrote together called The Everyday Leader. And it's amazing to me how many of these conversations I still have today as we're getting called for, again, leadership development, coaching for leaders who are unable to necessarily lead in today's ever changing environment. Leaders who are unable to think about what the culture is that they're creating with the words that they're saying or not saying, their actions, if there's alignment between the two. So leadership and this idea of really making sure that everybody has a strong foundation as a leader came up for us early on.
It's really interesting to hear you say that. It's almost like don't hoard the leadership
I
skills.
love that.
Don't
Yes.
just so it's not just about the high
Yeah.
potentials, right? So there's, resource constraints that force us to say, hey, these people are likely going to become technically, right, like leaders or executives at this organization. We're going to send them to more things, we're going to train them. But what you're saying is that everyone should have these capacities. And the way that you just described it, it's like setting that expectation that even as an IC, even as an individual
Yep.
contributor, you are expected to be a leader. And here's what that
Yeah.
means. So
Yeah.
what are the attributes of um a leader, like let's make it practical
Yep.
when we're thinking about, and let's just take our hypothetical individual contributor. What are some of the attributes that this person might learn or be encouraged to learn, or set expectations that they should learn, that benefit them even if they never take on a title with, VP, executive leader in it?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I would say the answer can be it depends, right? What's important to your organization? So, if innovation is a really key skill in your company, how do you help people be more innovative in their roles? How do you help them look at what their work is doing and how it translates to the global work that the company is doing?
Hmm.
But we can also look at skills that we're constantly seeing even now, right? Agility. Agility is such a huge skill that any individual can utilize in their day-to-day work. How do you pivot very quickly when times change? How do you move from, let's say, it's project to project? How do you have courageous conversations? Maybe you are having an issue with a coworker. How can you, with respect and aligned with the values of the organization, have a conversation that minimizes those issues so they don't even escalate to the level of the manager or HR for that matter? So it's really looking at who am I as a leader? What traits are important to us as an organization? What are our values? And then I'm a huge proponent of writing a leadership statement, right? This is a statement that can be 2 sentences or a paragraph that really says, I am this type of a leader. And then holding ourselves accountable to that, putting it up in our cubicles or in our offices or by our computer and using
Mhm.
it to guide our decisions. Now, you don't have to manage people in order to have
Or be
a
a leader.
leadership statement
Yep.
and in order to guide your decisions by a certain set of principles or values. Anybody can do that. It's basically this idea of democratizing leadership and not holding it in exclusivity at the top.
So here's what I'm hearing, which is there's all sorts of traits, and I would say, kind of the Josh point of view, the Great Mondays point of view, is all around expectations around behaviors.
Yep.
And often those are talked about as values. But what is added to the level, there's a layer of meaning that's added when you talk about them as leadership principles. And that is the expectation to move from a lean back to a lean forward, or from a, reactive to a proactive,
Yep.
because you can be, you can tell someone to be agile, but if they aren't asked to make proactive choices and then rewarded and definitely not punished for making proactive choices,
Yeah.
right? Mistakes are all part of that. Then you're taking that mindset of leadership. So it's like, really, when you're talking about leadership, it's ownership,
Ownership.
and being ahead of the wave instead of, behind it, which I think wraps us back to the very beginning, which is, what are all these things that are happening? And matter of fact, we have so many of these things, knowns and unknowns, and
Yep.
unknown unknowns, and knowns unknowns, and we have all those things that are happening. But if we're
Constantly.
not, it is an imperative that we are in this new, uh, crazy reactive world where all these things are coming at us. We can't just wait for there's no time to react.
Mm-mm.
There's only time to act. And if it's your responsibility setting expectations to be a leader and say, oh, this is coming, I'm going to make this decision, that's going to make a big difference for the organization. You're going to be
Yep.
able to have more ownership and feel more part of the the act acting the active part of
Yeah.
doing the work.
It's not happening to me at that point. I am actively part of it. But it also implies this caveat that our organizations need to provide folks with a certain level of authority, right?
Yes.
In order to
Yes.
experiment, in order
Yes.
to be agile, in order to do all of these things. So this is where it wraps back up into the culture aspect of it
Yeah.
and ultimately into executive or senior leadership as well.
Yeah.
And if we start at the IC level, if we start at right from day one on what it means to lead, then
Yeah.
as those folks move through our organization, a lot of the issues that we can find at a leadership level or at a senior leadership level around people are minimized automatically because they have been practicing these skills from day one.
Yeah.
Right. So we're helping. It's almost like that adage of help me help you type of a thing.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it may be a little bit of work at the beginning. It may be a little bit of time and energy and money and resources to really build it into foundationally who you are as an organization. But I think of, you talk about sustainability, right, of our companies. This is how you sustain companies and culture for the long run. You make sure that everybody has a say and a control around at least what they can control and an authority to control that.
Yeah. And I'll just repeat it, which is it's not just a nice to have, it's a must have
It's a
in
must
kind
have.
of this new crazy agile, business climate change world. So
Yeah.
Hema Crockett, Gig Talent, co-founder of Gig Talent. You can find more about her and her business. Go gigtalent.com. Hema, thanks so much for coming on Great Mondays Radio. This was such a fabulous conversation.
Thank you so much. I loved it. I love your insights too.